All right, welcome everybody. I have that it is noon here in Central Illinois, so we are going to get started. We appreciate everybody who is joining us today. As I mentioned before, it is a little stormy here in Central Illinois, so hopefully we will not have any tech issues. If we do lose our speaker today, please hold tight, and I'm sure she will rejoin us as soon as she can. But one of our co-hosts, Kelsey, is in Indiana, so she will be on if we have any tech issues from afar. So without further ado, my name is Chelsea Byers, and I am a family life educator with University of Illinois Extension, and I'd like to welcome you all to our first session of our summer self-care series. And this series is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at University of Illinois. This series is designed to connect those across the state with researchers at the university and provide evidence-based educational programming. And as you can see from our check-in chat box, not only from our state, but across the world. So welcome everybody. If you have any questions during our program, feel free to type those in our chat box. If you are joining us by phone today, please hold your questions until the end of the session, and we will make sure to get to you. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's session, Corinne Cannavale. Corinne received her Bachelor of Science degree in Molecular and Cell Biology with a minor in chemistry from University of Illinois. She is currently a PhD student in the Body Composition and Nutritional Neuroscience Lab, and her primary research investigates how memory can be enhanced through diet and exercise. So today she is going to talk about how knowledge is power and the importance of evaluating scientific claims. So I am going to turn it over to Corinne.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. Just a brief introduction. As Chelsea mentioned, I graduated from the University of Illinois in 2017, and now I am a fourth-year PhD student in the neuroscience program here. And I study diet and metabolism and how those can impact memory function. And for any of you guys tuning in from the East Coast, I am originally from New Jersey, but I've been in Illinois for the past 8 years now. So it's been a little while since I've lived out there, but I am originally from the East Coast. So I wanted to quickly start off just with you guys putting some answers in the chat about where you get your scientific information related to your health. So that could be like news articles, social media, anything that you can think of. Go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll give you guys a second to respond. And it looks like, Marcy, it's a little bit muffled. Let me know if it's gotten better. I just adjusted my headphones. So I'm seeing some answers coming in. It looks like we have a nice good mix of social media, peer review sources. Some of you guys are using Mayo Clinic, which I'll talk about later. We really like Mayo Clinic here. Internet, trusted websites, news. Hospital newsletters. I did not know that hospitals did that, so that's really great. Yeah, so these are all really great ways to access a lot of information about your health. And so basically what we're going to talk about today is I'll take you through some strategies that are going to be useful for you when trying to evaluate these sources and ensuring that all of the information you get is correct and evidence-based. So scientific discovery is kind of this cycle where we're always learning new things and asking more questions. And so it usually starts from an observation that we create, whether that be just in daily life or from previous experiments. And from there, we can ask a question related to that observation, create a hypothesis where we kind of judge what we think is the cause or relationship that we're observing. We then can run experiments, perform analyses, and then come to a conclusion. And usually a conclusion is not like a concrete stopping point for science. It then leads us to more observations so that we can continue this cycle. But when we are thinking about how science is then disseminated to the general public, this is primarily through popular media. And this is largely because there is a paywall for most people trying to get to the direct sources. So a lot of content that are like peer-reviewed journals and stuff like that, you really can't access unless you have some kind of affiliation with the university, where you then can access those journals, or you can pay to enter. And some of these journals can get pretty pricey. So it's really hard for people to access a lot of the peer review primary sources of scientific information without being involved in the scientific community. And popular media is great for getting scientific information if you the right kind of scientific information, but sometimes it can be a little bit misleading. And so I've included a few titles that we'll get into a little bit later on, where the titles are a bit misleading for what the studies actually are done. And so this is why it's really vitally important that you guys have a toolkit for assessing this information and figuring out how to determine what information is actually correct that you're reading about. And so I wanted to quickly just talk about the idea of correlation versus causation. This happens a lot in popular media, where they will take a correlational relationship and say that this means that there is a causational effect between these two things. And so this is taken from a website called Spurious Correlations. And you can see that there's a correlation between cheese consumption per capita in the United States and women who are being awarded PhDs. And so you could take that and think maybe more cheese consumption is causing more women to get PhDs. But what's more likely is just that more women are being accepted into PhDs and therefore obtaining their PhDs. And cheese is just becoming a more consumed product in the United States. So these are related to one another, but they're not a causational relationship. And so when we think about human research, there's kind of this hierarchy that we can think about when we are assessing information. And this has to do with how the studies were actually done. So we see at the very bottom of this pyramid is where we get these correlational analyses, where we're looking at just a relationship between two different variables. From there, we can go up to like case reports, where they're taking information from one person or one very small population. So why that's useful, it's not generalizable to a larger population. And the same with observational studies. They're usually not done in very large groups, and they're not manipulating anything that's going on with these groups. Once we get towards the top, specifically with these randomized controlled trials and non-randomized controlled trials, this is where we can start getting more of that causational relationship answered. And so in a randomized control trial, participants will be put into different groups and then go through an intervention or some kind of change in their lifestyle to see if that change is going to impact whatever your outcome of interest is. So for example, if you guys were around when we did the nutrition, wellness, and the brain seminar, I talked about a randomized control trial that was done at the University of Illinois, where we had participants consume 1 avocado a day for 13 weeks. And then we looked at cognitive functioning prior to and after the consumption of the avocado. And so for that, we are able to pull a direct correlational or a direct causational relationship from that randomized control trial. And then this last one is systematic reviews. This is where somebody goes through all of the literature and peer-reviewed sources and kind of pulls that all together to create a larger sample to see if there is an effect of a certain variable that they have a question about. And so now looking forward to how scientific findings can be misleading. So this can happen in a variety of different ways, and we'll kind of go through all 3 of these main topic points one by one. And the first one that we'll talk about is the misrepresentation of study findings. This can be done through a variety of ways, and we'll talk about it on the next slide. But basically, this could be things like not disclosing the model organism, so not all studies are done in humans. This could also mean that they're not correctly interpreting the study findings, and it could be that, like I mentioned earlier, correlational information is being represented as a causational relationship. And so looking at how studies can be misconstrued by the media, one of these, like I mentioned earlier, is kind of not disclosing what organism this was done in. So a lot of the times this happens in nutrition research when studies are done in mice, and the information will then be disseminated through a news article, but that news article will not include until much later on in the article that the study was done in mice. So you can see here, I have two articles that were looking at studies that were done in mice. And I also included the first paragraph of those articles. And you can see here that neither of those first paragraphs include that study was done in mice. And so that's really a big flaw of these publications, where they're not including this vital information, that this may not necessarily be apparent in humans, and still more research needs to be done.
Corinne, people are still having a hard time hearing you. They said it's still a little muffled.
Yeah, let me change over my microphone really quick.
Okay.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, perfect. I will stick with this then. So then the next one I'll talk about is just looking at whether or not the article is correctly representing what the study found. And so this is kind of a little bit more of a complicated issue, and we'll talk about it a bit more on the next slide. But basically, articles can sometimes go through a peer-reviewed source and kind of pick out the information that they want to talk about, and not really fully explain the article. And so this Daily Mail one is a really great example. This has to do with antioxidants. And the study was primarily in these kind of green leafy vegetables like kale and broccoli. But because these antioxidants are present in red wine and tea, the media really likes to capitalize on the idea that red wine cures everything. And so it's not necessarily what the study found. And so they're able to kind of separate out that relationship and give you a more catchy headline from what actually was found in the study. And then the last one I'll talk about, there it is studies that claim to see an effect, but it was correlational. So this is, like I mentioned earlier, with these correlational relationships being shown as a causation. And this happened a lot with red meat a couple years ago, where there was correlational evidence related to red meat and heart disease. And while they are strongly related, a lot of the information that was coming out at that time was more strongly talking about this relationship than what the scientific literature actually was standing behind. And so I'm going to just quickly go through the idea that an article can be misconstrued based on what was actually there. And so I thought this was a really great example that we could go through together. So this was an article that reported that eating ants could help protect against cancer. And they're saying that this is what the study actually found. So once I went through this article, I actually found these couple of paragraphs, about 7 or 8 paragraphs into the paper, the article, where they talk about what the study actually did. So in the study, they found, after grinding down insects, that they were able to quantify different concentrations of antioxidants in the insects that were actually significantly higher than things like orange juice or olive oil, as well as other antioxidant-containing foods that are present in our diet. I then had to find where this study was actually from, because there was no link or citation of the actual study that was done. So I was able to go through and find the name of the professor who was on this publication, as well as the journal that it was published in within the text of the article. So then I actually looked up what the article was, and I was able to find this article. It's called Antioxidant Activities of Water and Lipid-Soluble Extracts from Edible Insects. So these are not related to one another. The paper didn't really talk about cancer at all. It didn't do any kind of intervention work. It just talked about the presence of these antioxidant molecules in edible insects and didn't really talk about any kind of application beyond that in terms of human health. And so while antioxidants do have some evidence correlating to cancer prognosis, these are not equivalent in their article titles or in their content. And this can happen beyond just articles that we see online. So this can happen in advertising, social media, and we kind of have these things that are getting disseminated to the public but aren't necessarily true. So I really liked this Burger King one. They're talking about how they don't use preservatives and so their food rots, whereas like something like McDonald's wouldn't. This actually doesn't have to do with preservatives at all. It has to do with the amount of water content and activity that is in the food. And so it's misleading in that they're trying to use something to scare people into eating their food over another, even though it doesn't have to do with what they are advertising for. The next one I wanted to talk about was social media influencers. And we'll talk about this a little later on as well. But there are a lot of influencers that don't necessarily have the credentials to be giving the information that they are on their webpage. So this one here, I cited an influencer that was talking about organic diet dropping pesticide levels by 90%. This study was extremely biased and unreliable. The study had a very small sample size and wasn't very generalizable, and they didn't really have any credentials on their webpage to show that they were the person that really should be giving this information. This next one from Facebook, there was no study done. They just used some anecdotal evidence to make this, this post. And then this last one from YouTube, again, the person doesn't really have any credentials to support why they should be giving this information. And they're also supporting an extremely dangerous and not really scientifically backed form of dieting known as dry fasting. And so now I'll move ahead talking about the interpretation of visual data. And so this happens a lot on social media as well as on the news. And so I wanted to take a moment to talk about data visualization. So this is the first one, basically looking at the y-axes. So y-axes are these, these axes that are coming vertically off of the chart. And you can see here that I have two separate y-axes that are showing this correlational relationship, and neither of the axes start at 0. And so we're not able to adequately visualize whether or not this relationship is very strongly related. You can see here, once I plot them on the same axis, this, what used to look like a very large relationship is no longer really that much. It doesn't look like there's all that much change between consumption from 2008 to 2009 as well as sales from 2008 to 2009. So these ranges on graphs as well as the amount of axes that are labeled are going to be really vitally important for how we interpret the data. And so a lot of the times you'll see things like this shown online or on the news to kind of make you think that this is a really strong relationship that's occurring, when really this is more what that relationship looks like. And this is, again, just looking at the appropriate axis ranges. So this can happen a lot where we're looking at data that was collected over a series of time points, and they're trying to look at a specific trend. And so you can do this by zooming in on specific time points or by zooming out. So for example, this is a series of numbers that I just randomly put in to create this graph. And when you look at it with an axis range of 20, meaning that the y-axis is going all the way up to 20 here, it looks like pretty flat. There's not really that much change between these values. But when I put this on a more appropriate axis for the amount of data that's available, you can see that these are much larger changes than what we're seeing earlier on. So just making sure that the axis range are appropriate and that they're not trying to shorten or accentuate relationships just based on what the axis range actually is. And then the last one is just looking at simple math. So a lot of times you'll see graphs that are inappropriate for the data that's being shown. So for this, I made up some numbers where we looked at hypothetically 3 groups of people are asked whether or not they like ice cream. And so you can see for the blue group, they said 58% of people said yes. Orange group, 54% said yes. And this red group, 40% said yes. But when you look at that, that doesn't really make sense because we're looking at a circle graph. And so those should all ideally add up to 100%. And so this can be used in ways to kind of misrepresent how much of a certain population is making up a response because we're looking at the incorrect type of graph. In reality, this should be plotted on a graph that looks more like this, where we're able to see the differences between the different groups rather than looking at it on a circle chart where we're looking at the proportions between the groups. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is the idea of cherry picking data. So this is a little bit more complicated again, but basically it's looking at the idea that scientific studies may not be consistently having the same findings depending on how the sample was taken. And so when you're cherry picking, you're basically looking at only the studies that uphold your stance, and that can lead to misinterpretation of the data. And so, like I mentioned earlier, cherry picking is this practice of selecting only the results that fit your claim and excluding any of those that don't. And so I wanted to just do a quick example of how this can happen just from somebody looking online at some information that they can find. So I looked up dry fasting on Google News. And I was able to find a bunch of different articles, and I thought this was a good representation of how you could cherry pick data. So I have 4 articles here that were on the first page of Google after I looked up dry fasting. And so cherry picking would be an example of, sorry, my animation's a little off, pulling only this bottom article and reading through that and then seeing or saying, I saw an article that says dry fasting is really good, so that means I'm going to dry fast. When you're not cherry picking, you then could look at a variety of different articles and see that there's a majority of articles that are actually warning against this practice due to how dangerous it is. And so making sure that we are looking at a variety of sources and not just choosing the one that we want to be correct in order to make sure that we are well informed and evaluating the whole picture rather than just one snapshot. And so this happens to beyond just news articles and science. So this happened a lot with MSG. MSG has this kind of undeserved reputation because of some articles that had come out years and years ago claiming that MSG was bad for the brain and could create really, really crazy allergic reactions. But the evidence does not actually back up any of these claims. So I looked at some articles online about MSG. So this is an article that came out in 1970 where they looked at MSG in mice. And this is from a really reputable journal. It's from Nature, if you guys have heard of that journal. And this basically claimed that MSG is going to impact the brain detrimentally and therefore should not be consumed in the human diet. And so the first big red flag is this used to get cited a lot, but it is done in mice, so it's not necessarily translatable if we haven't done that in humans. I then went and found 2 different reviews and intervention studies where they looked at how MSG can impact human health and the brain. And both of these reviews, where they take in a variety of information and not just one article, found that there was no evidence linking MSG to any kind of illness after consumption. And so basically, because we are looking at the whole picture and not just one article, we're able to be a bit more informed on whether or not MSG is harmful to consume. I also just wanted to quickly go over scientific claim and financial gain, specifically because cherry picking is used a lot in popular media, especially when thinking about influencers or some documentaries that have come out. And so this is really, this is not every documentary. Some documentaries are really great, but not all documentaries are created equally. And a lot of the time this also happens with like celebrity endorsed health products. And basically they will choose the information that best applies to their message. And that will lead to their financial gain, either through buying into a program or a product that they're selling, or consuming their media and having other people consume it, where then they will get paid for however many people watch their video or documentary. And so I included a few examples down below. So things like the Goop Lab, that's run by Gwyneth Paltrow, Dr. Oz. This is a documentary called The Game Changers. It has to do with certain exercise and dieting practices in people who are like celebrities that work out a lot. And then like the pandemic documentary that came out recently, as well as What the Health, are all kind of really good examples of documentaries or influencers that have cherry-picked data in order to really uphold what their message is. And so just going through how to spot a good source, because I've talked a lot about bad sources and kind of the idea of how they can do that, but how do we actually spot something that's good and reliable? So the first thing, probably the most important thing, is looking for valid credentials. So in general, websites that are .org, .gov, .edu are going to have reliable information, and more specifically, things like clinicaltrials.gov, Mayo, CDC, the World Health Organization are all going to have really reliable evidence-based information for you. And if it's more like one specific person creating content, so for example, a podcast or a blog, what authority do they have to give you that reliable information? So making sure that we're reading and understanding who's giving that information, what are their credentials, do they, if they're giving nutrition information, do they have the RD or the master's in nutrition that would qualify them to do that? The next is looking at sources. So a lot of the times for reliable bloggers or social media influencers, you'll see that they'll post citations to all of the different studies that they talked about in whatever post that they were creating. So making sure that they're actually citing those primary sources. Will they even supply those primary sources? So this happens a lot on social media, where an influencer won't want to disclose all of the different scientific studies that they supposedly read, probably because they're not reading all of them. And then, are they getting monetary gain from you accepting their claims? So just being hesitant about whether or not purchasing an item from somebody who's giving you this information is going to impact them regardless of whether or not they're going to be helping you. And then the last, just doing your research. So making sure that you're not cherry picking and blindly accepting claims from one source, but instead doing some reading and finding more backup than just that one article or one post. And so I'm going to give you guys a chance to kind of practice this. So I gave you the about pages as well as the links from 2 different nutrition and brain blogs that we can kind of go through together. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to go through and read about this, and let me know which one you think is going to be the reliable and which one you think is going to be the unreliable. And you can just put that in the chat whenever you are ready. Yeah, Adam, that's a really great question. Why is the stuff like this Burger King ad not illegal? I'm not sure. That's a really great question. Just gonna read through some of your, yeah, Goop is a travesty. That's correct, Gail. Yeah, so I'm seeing some answers coming in. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of you guys are correctly identifying Neurologica blog as the more reliable source. And so we'll go through this a little briefly. So basically looking at for the about page for this natural news. So this person, Mike Adams, is saying that they are an activist turned scientist. And the health ranger. However, they don't really disclose any kind of credentials beyond the fact that they're a scientist. So do they have their master's or they have a PhD? Where did they go to school? Any kind of that information has not really been disclosed. Whereas Stephen Novella, who runs Neurologica, has included information on his position at Yale University, the fact that he's a medical doctor. He's given his contact information in case you want to learn a little bit more. And so this is a really great description of like how you can identify those correct versus incorrect sources. So I've got just a little animation so you guys can see that a little bit better. And then one last thing I wanted to chat about before we finish up. It looks like, yeah, these are not necessarily like the same exact topics that they're discussing, Jacqueline. I just wanted to use more of an example of an unreliable versus a reliable source for a blog. So like I mentioned, this can kind of move out beyond just information that you're getting online, specifically when it comes to supplements. So there are a lot of supplements out there that can make claims that are not necessarily FDA approved, and they disclose that, but a lot of the times that disclosure is really small or really difficult to find, and so people aren't able to readily find that the information they are claiming about their supplement is not FDA approved. I included a few examples of this. So like this Nariva one is a really big example. It claims brain performance, but then it does have a really small asterisk. And I actually went to Walmart and found this supplement and tried to find the little description for what the asterisk stands for, but I couldn't find it on the box, which is just really telling at how much they're trying to hide the information that it's not FDA evaluated. This is from the Hum Daily Cleanse website, where it says helps clear your skin and body from toxins. And then they include that little asterisk. And here at the bottom of their webpage, the information and content on this website is provided only for informational purposes. The statements on this site have not been evaluated by the FDA. They're not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. And so kind of just looking at that fine print and really evaluating whether or not any kind of claim is being made by a supplement is necessarily accurate. This also happens a lot with these like personalized vitamins, where basically they'll have you fill out a survey about your dietary habits and then send you what they think is going to be the best for your diet. while this in general seems like a good idea, it's better if the recommendations for supplements are coming from an actual registered dietitian rather than a survey you're taking online. And along with that, some of these personalized vitamin companies aren't necessarily including everything that they're saying they are inside the supplements. So they're not as regulated as just looking for supplements online or on at like pharmacies where they're specifically FDA approved supplements for a certain vitamin. And so when you're choosing supplements, just make sure that you are talking to your doctor or an RD regarding like what kind of nutrient and supplement needs you need. This can be really helpful for like people with certain dietary patterns, for example, like vegetarians lack like iron and B12 usually because they're not consuming meat. And so usually if you are following a vegetarian diet, a registered dietitian will recommend that you're consuming these vitamins, but they're also able to run tests to confirm that you need them. So some people who consume a vegetarian diet don't need an iron supplement because they get that adequately within their diet. So making sure that you're communicating with your doctor or a nutritionist, making sure that they are able to adequately give you recommendations for what you would need for a supplement rather than trusting something you're seeing online. And then choosing FDA approved supplements, which I think is just a really big one. Making sure that you are not just grabbing anything off the shelf because it's claiming it'll help with brain function. And then just quickly going back over everything that we talked about today. This is looking at just some key takeaways. So looking at visualization of data and why that's important for correctly representing what we're seeing, correctly evaluating sources based on their citations, and then also ensuring that we know that the FDA is not necessarily evaluating all of the claims that are made by supplements. And so I wanted to quickly open this up for you guys to see what you would do in the future for evaluating information that you're seeing online and kind of what action items you would like to follow moving forward to make sure that you are getting correct information on either wellness or your health online.
So you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can type it in the box.
Yeah, sorry, Cassandra, I should clarify what I said. I meant like that claims that they're making being approved. So like a good example being like the Daily Cleanse one where they're claiming that this is the case, but none of that has been actually evaluated. Yeah, Jacqueline, Google Scholar is a really great resource. Some journals are open access, and so some of them will be available to the general public. So just being aware of what you're using when accessing articles and seeing if you'll actually be able to get onto those. I also will say that like a lot of universities, if you're on the Wi-Fi, you're able to access articles. So if you're close to a university campus and are able to connect to their guest Wi-Fi, you might be able to access articles that way. Yeah, so talking to a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a nutritionist, if you have the means to go see an RD, are really great recommendations moving forward for kind of action items to follow to get adequate information. Oh yeah, that's really interesting. FDA takes action against safe products. Does not require appreciation. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing what other countries have, especially because considering that especially severe doses are being targeted.
Carol, I agree. Oftentimes people want to sell something that is going to promise memory enhancement and things like that. So it is tough. I get asked that question a lot.
Yeah, and so I think that's like taking initiative and coming to a seminar like this is a really great start to doing that. We have Mikkel Key from the neuroscience program actually talking about some aging and nutrition information later on. But yeah, like there's really not a way to hold everybody in the media accountable. So rather than trying to enforce that across the board, making sure that you are evaluating your sources, using correct information, then also disseminating that information to others who are interested to ensure that the correct information is being put out there. Yeah, browsing university news pages are really great, especially because the university is like, you know, they're being the press release for this this information, and so they really don't want to, yeah, sensationalize, as you're saying, the research that's happening. Yeah, choline and brain health. The lab that I work in, we actually just had a graduate student lead with her PhD who does a lot of work on choline. So choline's really cool and a really interesting nutrient that's kind of coming onto the scene for more than just infancy. Yes, Kelsey is mentioning third-party lab testing. So this happens a lot with supplements going through these third-party lab testings to ensure that they contain what they say they have and can correctly uphold what claims they're making is really important. And I'm going to just quickly go through, I created some action items that I think are going to be really useful moving forward. So making sure that you're reading an article completely. So as I mentioned earlier with the article about edible insects, the article didn't really have the actual information until much later on than the first few paragraphs. So making sure you're reading completely, don't rely on just the beginning or the title alone. Doing your research, so making sure that you're evaluating a variety of sources, looking at primary sources if you can, looking at the primary literature if you're able to. These are not really written for the general public, and they're usually behind paywalls. But if you do have the means to access primary literature and assess that adequately yourself, then that's also a really great way to do that. And then looking at who said it. So looking at the credentials of the person that's relaying that information and making sure that they are able to give that information correctly. Yeah, I love these comments in the chat about looking at anecdotal data. So anecdotal data is definitely not actually data. It's just stories from things that worked. And so we'll talk later on. Rue Liu, who's a master's student that just graduated, is going to be talking about fad diets. And fad diets are really where you get a lot of this like anecdotal evidence for testimonials is a better word, thank you, Marcia, for information about these things. And then I quickly just wanted to give you guys some recommendations, for reliable scientific information. Let's go through again. So these are kind of, oh my God. My computer does not want to cooperate with me today. So this is just kind of a thing that we put together with all of the graduate students you guys will hear from over the course of the summer. And these are some really great science communicators and websites and blogs and podcasts that I wanted to put together for you guys so that you have a variety of places to access evidence-based scientific information. And so I'm getting a lot of information in the chat just about, like Kelsey mentioned, talking to friends and family. If you see them spreading misinformation, never sharing articles based on the title. Who is the doctor about brain health on PBS for their fundraising? Yeah, I'm not sure who, Carol, you're specifically talking about, but yeah, that would be a situation where perhaps they would get financial gain, and so just thinking about what they're claiming and then making sure that can be backed up with others on the web that you're able to find. Yeah, PubMed is a really great source. I don't know why I didn't put it on there. Definitely PubMed is really great. They do have some information that's behind paywalls, so just being aware of that. But for the most part, PubMed is a really great resource to access. Yes, Kelsey is putting in information about endocrine disruptors. So that is a podcast that is hosted by Katherine Hatcher, who will be talking about menopause later on. And so she is a really great resource and has this really great podcast to access. WebMD is kind of hit and miss depending on what's out there. I would definitely recommend staying more with something like Mayo, where they have more evidence-based solutions than something like WebMD. NCBI, yep, NCBI is good. Linked for a podcast. Yeah, I think she's on Apple Podcasts for that one. But I could definitely grab you guys a link in a little bit and grab that. TED Talks depends on the TED Talk, honestly, and who's giving that TED Talk. So just making sure that any information that you guys see on a TED Talk, you can then find some additional information to support that beyond just that one TED Talk. So, and I'll leave this time open if you guys have any questions. We have about 10 minutes if you guys have anything, or you're welcome to continue kind of chatting. Or
I uploaded the handout into the chat box, but I am going to throw in a link where you can grab it, and I'm also going to throw in a link for the evaluation. We would appreciate if people who are attending would fill out the evaluation. It does help us for future programming, such as this one. So if you would click on the link, you can download the PDF for today's session. You can also fill out the evaluation as the second link I just popped in there. So that would, the presentation will be recorded, and I will throw in a link to where you will be able to find that presentation once it is posted. So just give me 1 second and I will throw that in the chat box as well. It will be on our extension website where you can find a ton of other amazing information. So let me grab that. You can just look for the summer self-care series, and within a week, everything will be live. You can also find the links to the handouts there, and things will be updated as each session continues through the summer.
And it looks like we have a question from, let's see. Michelle asked about functional and alternative medicine. I'm not super well versed on the topic. I know that there are some alternative medicine practices that are not super great. I know there are others that do have some evidence behind them. So again, just making sure that we're thinking about all of the evidence surrounding what's going on with alternative medicine practices. I know some people threw in some links earlier on in the chat. And so if you guys would like, I can go through and save those links at least for you guys. I'm happy to answer any other questions or go back to any slides if you have any information. Are you asking for sites to check in India in regards to information or in regards to accessing the content for this series? Yeah, so that might be a Chelsea question. I'm not sure if you should be able to access it, I'm assuming, but I'm not sure if you guys will have access.
I clearly missed the question. What was the question?
Sorry, this question was which site should we check in India? Oh, look at that. Doris is saying that you can actually save the chat on your own. So if you right click, or if you click on the dots next to the word file, you can save the chat for yourself too.
Okay. And I have everybody checked in for their CEUs or CPDUs. So if that's what you're checking in on, I have that. If you're asking about websites, you should be good to check those anywhere.
Yeah. And then the Qualtrics link is
Lisa,
for...
I have that. I'll answer that question. Lisa, this CEII, Continuing Education Institute, is going to email you a separate link for a separate evaluation that you will need to fill out in order for them to send you your certificate.
And I will also reiterate, the Qualtrics link is going to be really useful for us with planning later on. So I have a question in there for all of the different topics that are going to be covered over the summer. For you guys to ask questions ahead of time, and that way when we are making the content for each of those weeks, we can take your questions into account. So we would really love if you guys fill out that Qualtrics survey. It'll give us a chance to prepare these talks so that they are really catered towards what you guys want to know. And I think Chelsea included the Qualtrics link earlier on. I'm not sure if that will get sent in an email, Chelsea, so that you guys can access it.
Yeah, and it's on the website. So yes, it is. I will throw it in there again.
Yeah. And yeah, so next week, so we are going to be meeting every Tuesday at this time at noon to 1 Central Time. We are talking about sleep next week. And then after that, we'll be talking about, oh man, what are we talking about after that, Chelsea?
Decoding the diet you saw on the internet,
oh, yep.
Keto, gluten-free, and fasting.
Yep, so we're going to be talking about some fad diets, menopause after that. And so there will be a lot of really great talks later on in the summer too for you guys to come and hear more about what's going on at the U of I and then also just in general.
Yes.
And Chelsea just put the Qualtrics form in the chat again for you guys to fill out.
Yes. Also, if anybody got on late because they did not have the link, I will be emailing you to register. Everybody who was registered would have gotten the link for this week, so you will need to register to make sure you're on our registration. I'm not sure what happened if you did not get a, if you didn't, otherwise you'll need to check your other file or spam file because I did get plenty. I got some messages that people did not get the login information today. So
yeah, I got that too. I got a few people reaching out to me, Chelsea.
So I will be following up with all those individual emails and sending out the registration link, or you need to check your spam file that it went there.
Yeah.
So
Jessica is asking about MLMs for health. I'm assuming most of these are like cleanses and stuff like that. I'm not super familiar with like all of the different MLMs that are out there. I would say like look up
like
what
the teas
their
and stuff.
Yeah, like detox. Like I can
detox teas.
Like right now, detox teas and stuff like that. Not great. Don't do detox teas. But yeah, like I'm not sure about some that like I don't know how much is out there for things that are a bit more scientifically backed. So again, just doing your research, making sure that you're accessing articles and information from people that are not just involved with the MLM, just because they do have financial gain out there that may impact what they're actually telling you for their MLM. Thank you, Mikkel, for putting in the flyer.